He lived a simple life on the edge of the mountains, far from the noise and chaos of towns. His home was small, built from stones and wood he had gathered over the years. Every morning he would wake to the sound of wind brushing against the peaks and the distant calls of birds. Life was peaceful, quiet, and predictable until the day he found them. He had been walking along a narrow path near the cliffs, carrying a small basket of supplies, when he heard a soft, strange sound. At first he thought it was a bird, but the sound was higher, almost like a whimper, small and frightened. Curious, he moved closer to the edge, careful with every step. That was when he saw them. A small cluster of tiny creatures huddled together under a broken branch, their eyes wide and fearful. They were like nothing he had ever seen. Their skin was covered in tiny scales that shimmered faintly in the sunlight. They had small, delicate wings that seemed too fragile to lift their little bodies. And their eyes, big, golden, and intelligent, looked straight at him. Even though they were small, he could feel the strength inside them, the raw energy that was barely contained in their tiny bodies. For a moment, he froze. He knew the legends, stories told of a dragon, the deadliest of its kind, whose anger could burn forests in minutes.
And these hatchlings.
These tiny creatures were the offspring of that dragon. People in the nearby villages had whispered about them for generations, speaking with fear in their voices. No one dared approach the dragon, and even its young were said to be dangerous. But as he looked at them, he didn't see danger. He saw fear, confusion, and helplessness. Their mother was gone, and they were alone. Something inside him stirred. A feeling he had never felt before. A mix of curiosity and compassion pushed him forward. He knelt carefully, making sure not to frighten them. He spoke softly, though he doubted they understood. "It's okay," he said. "You're safe now." At first, they didn't move. They stared at him, their little bodies trembling. One of the hatchlings let out a tiny squeak, a sound so pitiful it made his heart ache. Slowly, almost hesitantly, they began to inch toward him. He stayed still, letting them come to him on their own. Finally, one of them nuzzled his hand. It was a small touch, but it felt like trust. He knew he couldn't leave them there. The mountains were full of predators, from wolves to giant birds of prey. Alone, they wouldn't survive the night, but taking them was not a simple task. They were wild, instinctively wary, and stronger than they looked. He moved slowly, speaking softly all the while, and managed to lift the smallest one into his arms. The others followed, hopping or scrambling after him, almost as if they understood that he was their only chance. Carrying them down the mountain was harder than he imagined. The hatchlings were surprisingly heavy for their size, their tiny claws digging into his arms as they tried to balance themselves. At one point, one of them let out a tiny roar, startling a flock of birds into the air. He froze, wondering if someone might have heard it. But the mountains were quiet, and soon all was calm again. By the time he reached the small clearing where he lived, the sun was beginning to dip behind the peaks, casting long shadows over the land. He set the hatchlings down gently, giving them space to explore their new home. They were cautious at first, sniffing the ground, fluttering their tiny wings, and looking around with bright, intelligent eyes. He watched them with a mixture of awe and nervousness. He knew he was taking a risk. Stories told of dragons' power and ferocity. Raising the offspring of such a creature could be dangerous. But looking at them, he felt no fear, only a strange connection. It was as if they trusted him because he had chosen to care for them when no one else would. That trust was fragile, but it was there. Night fell quickly in the mountains. He lit a small fire near the shelter, careful to keep it low so it wouldn't alarm the hatchlings. They huddled together, their bodies warm against each other, and he watched them, unable to sleep. His mind raced with questions. Could he really raise them? How would he feed them? Would they grow too strong, too wild? But despite the fear, he felt a sense of purpose. He found some small animals in the forest, rabbits and birds, to feed them. At first, the hatchlings were clumsy, their little jaws uncoordinated. One of them accidentally dropped a rabbit, looking confused. But with patience, he showed them how to eat, how to bite gently, how to trust him. It was exhausting, but every tiny success filled him with quiet pride. Days turned into weeks, and slowly the hatchlings began to thrive. Their scales grew shinier, their wings stronger. They started to explore more, hopping and fluttering around the clearing. He noticed small details, how one preferred to stay close to him, how another was more curious, poking at every stick and stone. Each had a personality, distinct and alive, and he found himself talking to them as if they were children. Despite their growth, he knew danger was never far. The legends were not lies. If the wrong person saw them, they could be killed, or worse, the entire forest could be disturbed. He became more careful, building fences from logs and stones, hiding the hatchlings from view. At night, he would sleep near them, listening to their tiny sounds, making sure they were safe. The bond grew stronger with each passing day. The hatchlings began to recognize him, chirping or squeaking whenever he appeared. One would crawl onto his shoulder, another would nuzzle his neck. It was a connection beyond words, something deep and instinctive. He realized he had become more than their caretaker. He was their family, the only one they had left. Even in these early days, he started to see glimpses of the dragon they could become. One of the hatchlings accidentally breathed a small spark while yawning, and another flapped its wings so hard it nearly lifted off the ground. It was terrifying yet magnificent. He couldn't help but wonder, what would happen when they grew larger, stronger, and more powerful? Would they still trust him, or would their instincts take over? But he pushed those fears aside. For now he had them, and that was enough. Each day brought new lessons, new challenges, and small victories. He learned their moods, their favorite spots in the clearing, and even the tiny noises that meant they were happy or upset. He had found a new rhythm, a life intertwined with creatures that were once thought untouchable, feared by all who had heard their story. The first part of their journey was over, but the beginning of a much larger story had only just begun. He had discovered them, saved them, and they had in turn saved something in him. The part of him that had longed for connection, purpose, and a bond that went beyond the ordinary. As he watched them sleep, tiny chests rising and falling, he knew one thing for certain: his life would never be the same again. Little did he know, the tiny hatchlings he had saved would one day grow into creatures capable of immense power, creatures that could change the course of events around them. And one day when the time came, they would remember him, not just as the human who fed them, but as the one who had given them life, hope, and love when no one else dared. And in that quiet mountain clearing, under the soft glow of the fire and the stars above, the human and the hatchling slept, unaware that their journey together had only just begun. Raising the hatchlings was far harder than he had ever imagined. At first he thought it would be simple: feed them, keep them safe, and watch them grow. But these little creatures were full of energy, instinct, and unpredictability. Each day brought a new challenge, and he quickly realized that caring for them required more than just kindness. It demanded patience, courage, and constant attention. The first challenge was feeding them. Their tiny bodies needed more than he could initially provide. Small animals from the forest, berries, and even fish from the stream were not enough. Sometimes the hatchlings would squeak and claw at him, their hunger turning them restless. He spent hours every day searching for food, climbing trees, wading into rivers, and even sneaking into nearby fields at night. Every meal was a small victory, every satisfied squeak a reward for his efforts. But it wasn't just hunger that made them difficult. They were wild at heart. One moment a hatchling would be snuggled close to him, soft and trusting. The next it would leap, flap its tiny wings, and dart across the clearing with surprising speed. He often had to chase them, laugh quietly at their antics, and sometimes get scratched or bitten. Though the injuries were minor, they reminded him that these were not ordinary creatures. They had the instincts of dragons in their blood, and he was learning that trust alone was not enough to control them. The hatchlings also had moods, and each one was different. One was calm and observant, often sitting quietly on a rock or his shoulder, watching the world around it. Another was curious and bold, constantly poking at everything, knocking over his tools or trying to catch insects. The third was cautious, hiding under branches or behind stones at every sound. He learned to read them like people, noticing subtle movements, tiny noises, and the way their eyes shifted when something was wrong. The first time one of them tried to fly, he almost panicked. The hatchling flapped its wings with all its tiny strength, but instead of soaring, it tumbled forward, landing in a pile of leaves with a soft thump. He rushed to check if it was hurt, only to see it look at him with wide eyes, then give a tiny, defiant squeak. He laughed a little nervously, realizing that even though they were small, their determination was enormous. That day he stayed close, helping them learn to balance and flap, and each little success made his heart swell with pride. Sleep was another challenge. They didn't follow any schedule, waking at odd hours, squeaking, moving, or even breathing fire in tiny sparks when startled. He often found himself sitting awake, watching over them through the night, making sure they didn't wander too far or injure themselves. Sometimes he would drift off only to wake to a warm body curled against him, or tiny claws tracing his arm. He didn't mind. In fact, those small moments of closeness made all the exhaustion worthwhile. But the biggest challenge came from the outside world. The villagers were curious, suspicious, and sometimes afraid. They had heard stories of the deadliest dragon and its young, and though they didn't know about the hatchlings, they noticed him going into the mountains more often. Whispers began to travel, rumors that someone had seen strange shapes or fires flickering in the distance. One day, a group of villagers came close to his clearing, peering through the trees. The hatchlings froze, and he froze with them, unsure whether to reveal them or hide them. That night he realized he needed to be more careful. The hatchlings were growing stronger every day, and if anyone discovered them, there could be danger for both him and the dragons. He built barriers from stones and branches, creating hidden spaces where they could retreat if needed. He learned to move silently, to anticipate their actions, and to protect them without revealing too much. It became a delicate balance between caring for them and keeping them safe from a world that didn't understand them. Despite all the challenges, there were moments of pure joy. He watched them play in the sun, chasing each other, tumbling over rocks, and testing their wings. They would squeak happily when he approached, nuzzle against him, and sometimes even mimic his movements in a way that made him laugh. It was as if they were learning from him, not just for survival, but for connection. He had never imagined that he could feel such a bond with creatures so different from humans. One day, he noticed a small spark of fire from one of the hatchlings' mouths. It was tiny, barely more than a flicker, but it was a reminder of the power they carried. He approached carefully, speaking in soft tones, and watched as the spark flickered again. The hatchling looked at him unafraid, and he realized that trust had begun to form in both directions. They were learning from him just as he was learning from them. Even as he felt pride, he also felt fear. He knew that dragons, even young ones, could be dangerous if provoked. A wrong move, a sudden sound, or even instinct could trigger their strength in ways he couldn't control. But slowly, through patience and care, he discovered a rhythm. He understood their moods, their needs, and their boundaries. He realized that raising them wasn't about controlling them. It was about guiding them, earning their trust, and respecting their nature. Hunger, curiosity, and instinct weren't the only lessons. The hatchlings taught him about resilience. Each day they faced challenges, stumbled, fell, and yet kept trying. They were fearless in their curiosity, persistent in their attempts to fly or explore. Watching them, he realized how much of his own life had been cautious and restrained. In their determination, he found inspiration to face his own fears and take risks he might otherwise have avoided. He also learned to be patient. Dragons, even young ones, did not respond to force or anger. If he tried to push them too hard, they would resist, hide, or grow frightened. He learned to slow down, speak softly, and allow them to make choices. Sometimes this meant waiting hours for a hatchling to approach or coaxing them gently to eat. It was exhausting, but over time he noticed the difference. They responded to care with loyalty, curiosity with engagement, and fear with trust. As the days passed, he began to feel the weight of responsibility. These creatures were growing quickly, and with that growth came strength, sharp claws, and fire. He knew that if anyone discovered them now, there could be disaster. The stories of the deadliest dragon were not exaggerations, they were warnings. But he also knew that abandoning them was not an option. He had chosen this path, and there was no turning back. By the end of the second month, the hatchlings had learned to recognize him instantly. They chirped, squeaked, and fluttered with excitement whenever he appeared. One would climb onto his shoulder, another would nuzzle his hand, and the third would follow closely behind, peering curiously at every movement he made. It was a family forming, small and fragile, but full of trust and connection. He also noticed something remarkable. Even in their youth, the hatchlings showed signs of intelligence beyond instinct. One seemed to understand his gestures. Another watched carefully as he prepared food, learning to imitate him. He realized that raising them wasn't just about survival. It was about teaching, guiding, and communicating in a language of patience, touch, and subtle cues. But not every moment was easy. There were days when one would refuse to eat, when another would become aggressive out of frustration, or when all three would wander too far and test his nerves. He learned to adapt, to remain calm, and to approach problems with thoughtfulness. Every challenge strengthened the bond between them. He began to understand that love and care weren't enough. They needed respect, guidance, and consistency. As the sun set each evening, he would sit among them, watching as the last light of day touched their shimmering scales. They would settle close, wings folding neatly, eyes half closed but alert. He felt a quiet peace, a sense that despite the hardships, they were safe and growing stronger each day. He whispered to them, not expecting words in return, but believing that his presence alone offered comfort. He realized that in raising them, he was also raising something in himself. Patience, courage, observation, and humility. The hatchlings were teaching him how to be more than he had ever been. Each small success, each tiny spark of fire or fluttering wing, reminded him why he had chosen this path. It was dangerous, unpredictable, and exhausting, but it was also full of wonder, trust, and the beginnings of a bond that would last a lifetime. By the end of part 2, he knew that raising these hatchlings was not just about survival. It was about forming a connection that would define both their lives. The challenges would continue and the outside world would eventually notice, but for now, he had earned their trust. And in that trust, he felt something extraordinary, the knowledge that even the smallest actions of care and courage could shape the destiny of creatures far beyond his imagination. As the days turned into weeks, the hatchlings began to change in ways that surprised him. Their tiny bodies grew stronger, their scales brighter, and their wings longer and more powerful. What had once been clumsy flutters now became determined attempts at flight. Each day he watched with a mixture of awe and nervousness, never knowing if the next leap would be a success or a tumble. He spent hours each morning observing them. One of the hatchlings had become particularly bold, darting across the clearing, leaping from rocks, and testing the limits of its wings. Another remained cautious, preferring to watch from a safe distance, only venturing forward when he was close. The third was curious in a quiet way, poking at sticks, leaves, and even his own belongings. Always learning, always exploring. Feeding them was still a challenge, though it had become slightly easier. They had learned to hunt small creatures under his guidance. He would hide behind rocks, letting them practice catching rabbits or fish from the stream, and sometimes they succeeded. Sometimes they failed. Each small success brought a spark of pride, and each failure was met with gentle encouragement. He discovered that patience was the key. The hatchlings needed to learn at their own pace, and forcing them would only break the trust they had built. It was during these training moments that he noticed something remarkable. The hatchlings were beginning to show signs of intelligence beyond instinct. One of them seemed to understand gestures, watching him carefully as he demonstrated how to hunt or move safely. Another would mimic his tone when he spoke softly, letting out tiny chirps that sounded almost like words. It amazed him. These creatures were not just animals, they were learning, observing, and adapting in ways that went far beyond what he had expected. One afternoon, while he was teaching them to balance on a fallen log, a sudden gust of wind sent one of the hatchlings tumbling. He rushed forward, heart pounding, only to find the little dragon had caught itself mid-fall with its wings and landed gracefully. He felt a surge of relief and admiration. The hatchlings were growing fast, stronger than he could have imagined, and their instincts were sharpening with every passing day. At night, he continued to sit with them by the fire. They had started sleeping closer together, curling up in a small pile near him, their breathing slow and steady. Sometimes he would reach out a hand and one of them would nuzzle against it, a small gesture of trust and affection. He often whispered to them, telling stories of the mountains, of the skies, and of the safety he promised to provide. Even though they could not understand every word, he knew they felt his presence, his care, and his commitment to them. The villagers, however, were beginning to notice changes in the environment. Strange shadows flitted across the cliffs at dusk, and small sparks of fire occasionally flickered in the distance. Rumors spread, some of fear, others of curiosity. He knew he had to be careful. The hatchlings were growing stronger, and if anyone discovered them too soon, it could lead to disaster. He became more cautious, building additional shelters and creating hidden paths in the forest where they could retreat safely. One day, he realized the hatchlings were starting to respond to his voice in new ways. A soft whistle would bring one to him, while a gentle clap would make another pay attention. He began teaching them simple commands: approach, stay, and follow. To his amazement, they learned quickly, their sharp minds catching on to his guidance. It was not just about survival anymore. It was about communication, connection, and trust. The hatchlings' abilities began to show in small, exciting ways. One of them accidentally breathed a tiny spark while yawning, startling a flock of birds into flight. Another flapped its wings with such force that it lifted slightly off the ground, wobbling in the air before landing gracefully. Every display of their budding power filled him with a mixture of pride, awe, and caution. He knew that with time these creatures would grow into beings of incredible strength, and he felt the weight of responsibility more keenly than ever. Despite the challenges, joy was never far away. He found himself laughing at their antics, marveling at their discoveries, and celebrating each new skill they mastered. They would chase each other through the clearing, tumble over rocks, and practice short flights together. Even the cautious hatchling began to test its wings, encouraged by the playful energy of its siblings. Each day was filled with learning, excitement, and a deepening bond that grew stronger with every shared moment. The human also noticed changes within himself. Raising the hatchlings was teaching him patience, resilience, and observation. He learned to anticipate their needs, to read their moods, and to respond with calm and care. His life had become intertwined with theirs in a way he could never have imagined. Every decision he made affected them, and every small success reinforced the trust between them. He realized that this bond was not one-sided. It was a mutual connection, built on care, guidance, and respect. One morning, he took the hatchlings to a nearby cliff edge to observe their first attempts at real flight. The wind was strong, the air crisp and clean. He watched as one by one, they leaped from the edge, flapping their wings with determination. Some stumbled, some tumbled, but all managed to right themselves and glide for a few moments. The sight was breathtaking. He felt a surge of pride and relief. The hatchlings were learning, growing, and thriving under his care. As they rested on a rocky outcrop, he noticed their curiosity about the world beyond their clearing. One watched the mountains with intent, its golden eyes following the path of a distant bird. Another explored the rocks around them, poking and prodding at every crevice. The third stayed close to him, nuzzling his hand and chirping softly. He realized that they were not only learning physical skills, they were learning to observe, understand, and interact with their surroundings. At night, he continued to reflect on the progress they had made. The hatchlings had grown stronger, smarter, and more confident. Their bond with him had deepened, and he had learned to trust their instincts while guiding them gently. He also knew that challenges lay ahead. They were growing rapidly, and with growth came new risks and responsibilities. But for now, he allowed himself to enjoy the small victories, the laughter, and the quiet moments of connection that made every hardship worthwhile. Over the next few weeks, he began to notice their unique personalities more clearly. The bold one loved to explore and test limits, often leading the others into small mischief. The cautious one observed quietly, learning from mistakes before taking action. The curious one was always asking questions, touching everything, and seeking answers. Each had a distinct mind, and he adapted his care to suit each one, learning more about patience, guidance, and love in the process. He also started to see signs of loyalty. When he moved through the clearing, the hatchlings followed, staying close and responding to his gestures. If he became distracted or stepped too far, they would call softly, their voices small but insistent. It was clear that they recognized him not just as a caretaker but as a leader, a protector, and a guide. The trust they had placed in him was growing stronger every day, and he understood the depth of the bond they shared. One day, while he was repairing part of their shelter, he looked up to see the hatchlings attempting to fly higher than ever before. One leapt from a rock, catching the wind perfectly, and soared for a few heart-stopping moments. The others watched, chirping encouragement. It was a magical sight, one that filled him with awe and a little fear. They were powerful, intelligent, and capable of incredible feats. He realized that the time was coming when they would no longer be tiny, manageable creatures. They would grow into dragons of legend, creatures whose presence alone commanded respect and caution. Yet, despite their growing abilities, they never lost the trust and affection they had for him. Even as they flapped their wings and explored the heights, they would return to his side, curling up near him or nuzzling his hand. Their loyalty was unwavering, a testament to the care, patience, and guidance he had given them. It was a bond that could not be forced, only earned, and he felt honored to have been trusted by such extraordinary creatures. By the end of Part 3, he knew that the hatchlings were no longer helpless infants. They were strong, curious, intelligent, and beginning to understand the world in ways he could only imagine. He also realized that his life had changed forever. He was no longer just a simple human living on the edge of the mountains. He was a guardian, a teacher, and a part of a story far larger than himself. He could see the future in glimpses, the challenges, the risks, and the moments of awe yet to come. The hatchlings would grow, their power would increase, and the world around them would one day recognize their presence. But for now, he focused on the present, cherishing every leap, every spark, and every small display of trust and affection. These moments, he knew, were the foundation of a bond that would last a lifetime. And as the sun set behind the mountains, casting a golden glow over the clearing, he sat with the hatchlings, watching them settle for the night. Their tiny bodies glimmered in the fading light, their eyes half closed but alert. He whispered to them softly, promising safety, care, and guidance. Little did he know, the trust they had placed in him now would shape their future in ways that neither he nor the world could imagine. Life in the mountains had become a delicate balance of trust, care, and vigilance. The human had grown used to the routine of raising the hatchlings, but he knew that danger could appear at any moment. The villagers had started to notice unusual movements in the forests and strange flickers of fire in the distance. Rumors were spreading quietly, tales of a human living with unknown creatures, dangerous and wild. Though he tried to ignore them, he understood that the outside world could pose a serious threat, not only to him, but to the hatchlings he had worked so hard to protect. One morning, he awoke to a sense of unease. The air was still, the forest unusually quiet. As he approached the clearing, he noticed small signs that disturbed him: broken branches, footprints that did not belong to him, and shadows flitting quickly among the trees. He instinctively gathered the hatchlings close. Their golden eyes followed his every move, alert and tense. Even the boldest of the three hesitated, sensing that something was wrong. He had always known that raising creatures like these carried risks, but this was the first time he had felt a real threat approaching. Carefully, he hid the hatchlings in their small shelters, making sure each one was safe and calm. They chirped softly, responding to his reassuring touch and quiet voice. He knew that panic could make them reckless, and in their growing power that could be dangerous. He needed to remain calm even though his own heart pounded in fear. Later that day, he saw the first human intruders. A small group of villagers had ventured into the mountains, carrying tools and weapons. They were cautious, but their eyes were filled with curiosity and fear. They had heard the stories of dragons, and now they were determined to see for themselves. The human realized that hiding the hatchlings would be the only way to protect them. He guided them silently into concealed spots, camouflaged by rocks and foliage. They crouched close to him, their tiny bodies trembling, but their trust in him remained steadfast. The intruders moved slowly through the clearing, calling out occasionally, asking if anyone was nearby. The human stayed silent, heart racing. He could feel the tension in the hatchlings. They sensed danger instinctively. He whispered to them softly, urging them to remain still and quiet. It was a tense moment, one that could decide the safety of all of them. Every sound, every shadow mattered. Hours passed and the intruders continued to search. The human stayed vigilant, watching them from a hidden vantage point. He noticed that they were skilled in tracking, moving with purpose and caution. He realized that they would not leave without finding something, and he knew he had to prepare for the possibility that they might discover the hatchlings. His mind raced with ideas: how to protect them, how to guide them, how to prevent harm without provoking unnecessary conflict. As evening approached, the intruders grew more frustrated. They had seen nothing, found no trace of the creatures they were seeking. One of them whispered, "Maybe it was just a story. Dragons don't exist here." The human exhaled quietly, relieved that the immediate threat seemed to be passing, but he knew it was only temporary. People were curious, and curiosity could quickly turn into danger. He needed to prepare the hatchlings, to teach them how to respond if someone ever got too close. He spent the next few days observing them closely, noting their instincts and reactions. He realized that their abilities were growing rapidly, and with their growth came the potential to defend themselves. One of the hatchlings, when startled by a sudden noise, emitted a small, controlled spark of fire. Another flapped its wings to create a gust of wind, scattering leaves and small debris. The third crouched low, ready to strike if necessary. These instincts were raw but powerful, and the human knew that with guidance the hatchlings could learn to protect themselves, and him, without causing harm unnecessarily. He began to train them carefully. Each day he taught them how to recognize threats, how to respond calmly, and how to use their emerging powers in a controlled way. He demonstrated how to breathe a spark without burning, how to flap wings to create a defensive gust, and how to stay alert without panicking. It was delicate work, requiring patience and trust, but the hatchlings were intelligent, learning quickly and responding to his instructions with growing confidence. Despite the training, there were moments of fear. One evening, a distant howl echoed through the mountains and the hatchlings froze, their tiny bodies tense with instinct. He reached out to them, speaking softly, reminding them that he was there. Slowly they relaxed, and he realized that trust was not just about feeding and care. It was about guidance and reassurance in the face of danger. They looked to him for leadership, and he accepted that responsibility fully. He also noticed that their bond with each other was strengthening. The bold hatchling would often protect the cautious one, while the curious one explored alongside the others, learning from both their strengths and their mistakes. Together, they formed a small, united family, relying on each other for support and courage. The human marveled at their resilience and intelligence, realizing that they were more than just creatures to raise. They were companions, allies, and students in the art of survival. One afternoon, he spotted movement on the edge of the clearing. A stranger had appeared, cautiously approaching. The human acted quickly, signaling the hatchlings to stay hidden. The stranger paused, scanning the area, then turned and left. The human exhaled slowly, realizing that these encounters could happen at any time. He needed to prepare them for the inevitability of discovery while keeping them safe. He began to create safe zones within the clearing. Small hidden spaces made from rocks and foliage provided places for the hatchlings to retreat if they felt threatened. He also established signals, chirps, movements, and gestures that allowed them to communicate silently with him in moments of danger. It was a delicate balance between teaching caution and maintaining their natural instincts, but he knew it was necessary. As the days passed, he noticed subtle changes in their behavior. They began to anticipate his instructions, responding before he even finished gestures. Their instincts were sharp, their intelligence growing, and their loyalty unwavering. One day, a small fire broke out in the grass near their shelter, and the hatchlings reacted instinctively. One breathed a controlled spark upward, creating a gust that helped redirect the flames, while the others worked together to nudge debris and prevent the fire from spreading. He watched in awe, realizing that they were learning not just to survive, but to act intelligently and cooperatively in the face of danger. The human also reflected on his own growth. The constant vigilance, the training, and the responsibility had changed him. He had become more patient, more aware, and more connected to the natural world. He had learned to read the smallest signs of movement, sound, and behavior, not just in the hatchlings, but in the forest around him. Danger was always present, but he had learned to anticipate it, to respond calmly, and to guide those under his care with steady hands and a calm heart. Despite the challenges, there were moments of joy and wonder. He would watch the hatchlings play in the sunlight, chase each other through the clearing, or test their wings in short, exhilarating flights. Their energy and curiosity were infectious, and he found himself laughing at their antics, marveling at their growth, and feeling a deep sense of pride. These moments reminded him why he had chosen this path, why he had risked so much to protect them, and why he could never abandon them no matter the danger. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, he sat with the hatchlings, reflecting on the past weeks. They had faced challenges, dangers, and the unknown, yet they had grown stronger, smarter, and more resilient. They had learned to trust him, to follow his guidance, and to respond to danger with intelligence rather than fear. And in return, he had learned patience, courage, and the depth of connection that could exist between human and dragon. He knew that more challenges lay ahead. The world beyond the mountains would not remain unaware forever. There would be those who sought to harm, capture, or control the hatchlings. But he also knew that they were ready in their own way. Their instincts were sharp, their abilities growing, and their bond with him unbreakable. Together they could face whatever came, guided by trust, care, and the understanding that they were stronger together than apart. As the night fell, The human watched the hatchlings settle in their shelters, their bodies curled close, wings folded neatly, and eyes half closed but alert. He whispered softly, promising safety, guidance, and protection. Little did he know these early lessons in caution, trust, and self-defense would shape the hatchlings in ways that would one day save him, and perhaps others from dangers he could not yet imagine. In that quiet mountain clearing, under the soft glow of the moon and stars, he felt a sense of purpose and determination. The hatchlings were no longer helpless infants. They were learning, growing, and preparing for a world that might not understand them. And he, their human guardian, was ready to guide them every step of the way, no matter the risks, no matter the challenges, no matter the dangers that lay ahead. The mountains had never felt so tense. The human could sense it in the air. The quiet whispers of wind through the trees, the uneasy rustle of leaves, the distant cries of animals unsettled by something they could not see. He had spent months raising the hatchlings, guiding them and teaching them to trust him. But now the time had come to see how much they had truly learned. Danger was approaching, and it would test their bond, their instincts, and their loyalty. It started with a single sound, sharp and threatening. A group of hunters had entered the forest, moving carefully but with intent. They carried ropes, nets, and torches, their eyes scanning the clearing for signs of the creatures they had heard rumors about. The human had tried to prepare for this day, but nothing could fully replicate the tension of knowing that the hatchlings might be discovered, and that their lives were at stake. He quickly gathered the hatchlings, whispering to them to stay hidden. The bold one chirped softly, ears twitching, wings fluttering slightly. The cautious one froze completely, eyes wide with fear, while the curious one peeked nervously from behind a rock. He knelt beside them, speaking in soft, calm tones, reminding them to trust him, to stay quiet and to wait for his signal. Their small bodies pressed close to his, trembling but attentive, showing that the lessons of the past months had taken root. The hunters moved closer, their boots crunching on the forest floor. The human felt his heart race. He could not fight them. He had no weapons, no strength to confront a group of humans trained to capture or kill. His only hope was the trust and training he had instilled in the hatchlings. He whispered again, encouraging them to remember what he had taught. Stay calm, watch, and act only if necessary. The first confrontation came unexpectedly. One of the Isais, hunters curious and impatient, stepped too close to a hidden branch. The branch snapped under his foot, and the noise echoed across the clearing. The hatchlings reacted instantly. The bold one emitted a controlled burst of flame, not enough to harm, but enough to startle and distract. Leaves and sparks flew into the air, drawing the hunter's attention away from the hiding place. The human's heart leapt with both fear and pride. They were using their abilities intelligently, not recklessly, and responding to threats in the way he had taught. The cautious hatchling remained hidden, observing everything, while the curious one emerged slightly, flapping its wings to create a gust that scattered loose debris. Together they formed a small, coordinated defense, instinct and training working side by side. The human realized that their trust in him had transformed into something greater. They were learning to protect not only themselves, but also him, their guardian, the one who had given them care, safety, and guidance. The hunters, now aware of the strange behavior in the forest, grew louder and more determined. One raised a net, preparing to trap what they believed were dangerous creatures. The human knew he had to act. He whispered urgently to the hatchlings, signaling them to move as a unit. They responded instantly. The bold one flared its wings and breathed a small, precise spark, creating a smokescreen that confused the hunters. The cautious one darted forward, using its body to knock down small branches, adding to the chaos. The curious one flapped with such force that the gust blew a torch off its holder. It was not an attack. It was a defense. A clever, coordinated, instinctive response that protected them and their human, without causing real harm. The human could hardly believe his eyes. Months of training, patience, and trust had led to this moment. The hatchlings were no longer helpless. They were intelligent, aware, and loyal beyond measure. The hunters, now panicked by the unexpected resistance, began to retreat. Their shouts echoed through the forest as they scrambled to regain control. But the hatchlings were relentless in their defensive measures. Small sparks, gusts of wind, and quick movements kept the intruders off balance. The human stayed low, heart pounding, watching as the creatures he had raised performed with precision and care, demonstrating a loyalty and intelligence that few humans had ever witnessed. When the hunters finally fled, the forest fell silent once more. The human exhaled slowly, relief washing over him. He knelt beside the hatchlings, speaking softly, praising them for their courage and cleverness. They chirped and nuzzled against him, small bodies pressed close, eyes bright and attentive. In that moment he understood something profound. The bond they shared was not just about care and survival, it was about trust, loyalty, and mutual respect. They had protected him as he had protected them. The next few days were quiet, but they were filled with reflection. The human observed the hatchlings closely, noting how quickly they had learned to assess danger, respond intelligently, and act in unison. He realized that they were growing far beyond his expectations. Their intelligence, instincts, and loyalty had reached a level that even he had not anticipated. He began to understand that raising them was not just about survival. It was about preparing them for a world that might not understand them, a world that could be dangerous and unforgiving. He also noticed subtle changes in their personalities. The bold hatchling had grown more confident, taking the lead in explorations and responding quickly to threats. The cautious one had learned to trust its instincts while remaining aware, no longer paralyzed by fear. The curious one had become more analytical, observing situations carefully before acting. Together they were forming a dynamic, cohesive unit, capable of thinking, learning, and responding in ways that amazed him. One evening he took them to the cliff where they had first attempted flight. The sun was setting, casting golden light over the mountains, and the hatchlings flapped their wings in excitement. He watched as they soared for longer distances, coordinated in their movements, gliding and landing with precision. It was a breathtaking sight, a reminder of how far they had come and the incredible potential within them. He felt a mix of pride, awe, and responsibility. They were growing into creatures of immense power, and he knew he had to continue guiding them with care and wisdom. Despite the excitement, he remained vigilant. The hunter's attempt had shown him that the world outside the mountains was unpredictable and potentially dangerous. He began to strengthen their shelters, create hidden escape routes, and teach the hatchlings to respond quickly and intelligently to any threat. Every day became a balance of exploration, training, and preparation, ensuring that they were ready for whatever challenges might come. The human also began to reflect on the lessons of this crisis. He realized that trust and patience were not enough. The hatchlings needed guidance, training, and the confidence to act in difficult situations. He understood that raising them was about more than feeding, sheltering, and protecting. It was about teaching, nurturing, and preparing them for the realities of the world. And in return, they had shown him the meaning of loyalty, courage, and the power of mutual trust. As the weeks passed, he noticed the hatchlings becoming more independent, yet still connected to him. They explored further from the clearing, practiced, flying at greater heights, and tested their abilities in new ways. And yet, whenever danger approached, they returned to him ready to protect and defend. Their bond had grown stronger than ever, a connection that transcended species, built on care, trust, and shared experiences. One morning, he observed a small group of wild animals approaching the clearing. The hatchlings responded instinctively, using controlled sparks and gusts of wind to redirect the animals without causing harm. He watched with awe as they coordinated their movements, each one anticipating the other's actions. It was a clear demonstration of how far they had come, a moment that filled him with pride and relief. They were no longer just hatchlings. They were skilled, intelligent, and loyal companions, capable of protecting themselves and those they cared about. That evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, he sat with the hatchlings by the fire. They curled close to him, wings folded neatly, eyes bright but relaxed. He whispered softly, praising them for their courage and intelligence, and they chirped in response, nuzzling against him. In that quiet moment, he realized that the events, of the past days had strengthened their bond in ways that nothing else could. They had faced real danger, acted intelligently, and protected one another. And through it all, their loyalty to him remained unwavering. By the end of Part 5, he knew that the hatchlings were ready for the challenges that lay ahead. They had faced their first real threat together, and they had succeeded. Their instincts, intelligence, and loyalty had grown stronger, and their bond with him had deepened beyond anything he had imagined. He understood that their journey was far from over, but he also knew that together, they could face whatever came, guided by trust, care, and the extraordinary connection they shared. Time passed and the hatchlings grew rapidly. Their wings stretched wide, scales became harder and glimmered in the sunlight, and their strength was astonishing. The human watched with a mixture of pride and amazement, realizing that these small creatures he had once rescued and fed by hand were no longer dependent infants. They were strong, intelligent, and capable of defending themselves, and him in ways he could never have imagined. Despite their growth, the bond between them had not weakened. Every morning they greeted him with soft chirps, nuzzles, and flaps of excitement. They followed him through the forest, watched his movements carefully, and responded to his gestures without hesitation. It was clear that they had not only remembered his guidance but had also internalized it, trusting him completely while asserting their newfound strength and independence. The human had also grown in ways he had not expected. Years of patience, teaching, and care had shaped him into someone capable of understanding and guiding creatures of incredible power. He could read their subtle movements, anticipate their instincts, and communicate with them through soft words, gestures, and quiet signals. His life had changed forever. He was no longer just a solitary human in the mountains. He was a guardian, a friend, and a part of something extraordinary. One morning, as the sun rose over the peaks, he took the hatchlings to a clearing high above the valley. The wind was strong, the air crisp and fresh, and the space was perfect for testing their full potential. The hatchlings chirped with excitement, wings flapping as they prepared to soar. The bold one leapt first, catching the wind perfectly and gliding effortlessly through the sky. The cautious one followed, steady and precise, while the curious one darted playfully, testing speed and maneuverability. The human watched, his heart swelling with pride. It was during these flights that he noticed something remarkable. Each hatchling now seemed to understand not just movement and instinct, but also the concept of teamwork. They swooped together, flapped in synchrony, and used gusts of wind to help each other maintain balance. The air was filled with their joyful chirps and the rustle of powerful wings. It was a moment of pure awe, a testament to the months of care, patience, and trust that had shaped them. After their flights, they returned to him, landing gracefully around his feet. The bold one nuzzled his hand, the cautious one pressed close to his side, and the curious one chirped softly, circling him in playful joy. The human knelt, laughing softly, feeling a profound sense of connection. They were no longer helpless or small. They were companions, friends, and protectors in their own right. And now they seemed to understand something deeper, a gratitude that went beyond instinct. It wasn't long before that gratitude became clear in actions rather than gestures. One afternoon, while exploring the mountains, the human slipped on a wet rock near a rushing stream. He lost his footing, arms flailing, and a sharp rock cut his leg. Pain surged through him, and he realized immediately that he could not move without risk. Before he could call out, the bold hatchling was there, flapping its wings to stabilize him and using its body to shield him from slipping further. The cautious one circled, eyeing the terrain, while the curious one leaned close, gently nudging him to calm his panic. In that moment, he understood fully that the hatchlings were no longer dependent on him. They were capable, aware, and fiercely loyal. They had learned to respond to danger intelligently and protectively. They were thanking him in their own way, showing that his months of care had not only saved their lives but had also built a bond that was unbreakable. His heart swelled with emotion. He had given them safety and guidance, and in return, they gave loyalty, intelligence, and gratitude beyond words. As time went on, their abilities continued to grow. They learned to fly longer distances, breathe controlled flames without harming the environment, and navigate the mountains with instinct and precision. The human watched with a mix of pride and humility. He had never imagined that the small, fragile hatchlings he found abandoned would grow into creatures of such power, yet every day their intelligence, skill, and care reminded him of the bond they shared. The villagers' curiosity and fear gradually increased as the hatchlings matured. Strange lights flickered across the mountains at dusk, and distant shadows of wings were spotted soaring in the sky. But the hatchlings had learned caution. They would soar at a distance, always aware of the humans' guidance and their own instincts. And when danger drew too close, they would act in harmony to protect themselves and their guardian. It was a dance of trust, skill, and loyalty that no human eyes had fully witnessed, except his. One day, a sudden storm swept over the mountains. Lightning split the sky and wind howled through the peaks. The humans struggled to guide the hatchlings to safety, knowing that strong winds and rain could be deadly. But the hatchlings acted swiftly, coordinating with instinct and intelligence. They flapped their wings in perfect unison to help each other stabilize, creating miniature windshields and guiding him safely to a protected cave. When they reached shelter, all three pressed close to him, chirping softly as if to say, "We are safe together." In that moment, he felt an overwhelming sense of pride, gratitude, and awe. It became clear that the hatchlings had matured not only in strength but in character. Each had developed a distinct personality, tempered by experience and loyalty. The bold one became a natural leader, confident and decisive. The cautious one became wise, always aware of potential danger and alert to subtle changes in the environment. The curious one remained playful and intelligent, exploring, learning, and always seeking ways to improve. Together they formed a trio of balance, capable of facing challenges with intelligence, instinct, and courage. The human realized that the most profound change was not in their strength or abilities but in their gratitude. They had been rescued, nurtured, and protected, and now they reciprocated in ways that transcended words. They protected him, guided him, and shared their lives with him fully. Every action, every chirp, nuzzle, flight, or spark of fire was a demonstration of their loyalty and appreciation. He had saved them once, and now they were saving him, not just physically but emotionally, filling his life with joy, connection, and purpose. One morning as the sun rose, painting the mountains in gold, the human and the hatchling sat together on a cliff. The wind blew softly and the world felt peaceful. The hatchlings flapped their wings in playful arcs, then returned to him, pressing close as if to remind him that they would always be there. The human looked at them, heart full, and whispered softly, "You've grown beyond my dreams. I am proud of you, and I am grateful for you too." The hatchlings chirped in response, a sound that felt almost like a shared language of trust and love. In the months that followed, the human continued to guide and protect them, but they had become more than companions. They were guardians, friends, and a family that had formed in the most unexpected way. They soared through the skies with grace, explored the forest with intelligence, and always returned to him, demonstrating a loyalty that was rare and precious. He had raised them, but they had also raised him, teaching patience, courage, and the meaning of trust and gratitude. By the end of this journey, it was clear that their bond would last a lifetime. The hatchlings, now powerful and intelligent dragons, had never forgotten the care, patience, and love that had saved their lives. They had learned to respect him, trust him, and protect him. And the human in return had learned that the smallest acts of courage and kindness could grow into connections stronger than any fear, larger than any danger, and more profound than words could describe. One evening, under the glow of a setting sun, the human watched as the hatchlings took flight. They soared high, wings spread wide, glimmering in the light. Then one by one they returned, circling him in a protective and joyful dance. He felt their gratitude in every movement, their loyalty in every chirp, and their love in every nuzzle. They had come full circle, from helpless, abandoned hatchlings to powerful, intelligent creatures who would one day carry forward the lessons of trust, care, and gratitude he had taught them. In that quiet mountain clearing, with the wind brushing his face and the hatchlings settled around him, he understood the full meaning of their journey. Life had been unpredictable, challenging, and sometimes frightening. Yet through patience, courage, and love, he had raised not just dragons but companions who would forever honor the bond they shared. And in their loyalty and gratitude, he found something rare and extraordinary, a connection that proved that the smallest acts of kindness could echo far beyond what anyone could imagine. The mountains were no longer just a home. They were a sanctuary, a place of trust, growth, and shared strength. And the human who had once found abandoned hatchlings by chance knew in his heart that the dragons would never forget him, just as he would never forget them. Their journey together had come to a new beginning, one filled with loyalty, courage, and a gratitude that would last a lifetime.